Good afternoon, and welcome to Sage Day's webinar on how to assess and manage school refusal behavior. I'm Chris Leonard, Director of School Operations for Sage Day, and I'm joined today by John Riley, Sage Day's Executive Director. There we are. We want to make sure you get the most out of today's event, so one of the first things I'd like you to do is look for the chat box, which should show up on the right side of your screen. And then all the way at the bottom, there is a place where it says type message here. That's a place where you can enter a question. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end where we will address questions. But please, if a question pops into your head, type it in at any time, and that way it'll kind of be in the queue by the time we reach the Q&A portion. Also, if you're experiencing any issues with the webinar at any time, if you're having trouble hearing or anything like that, please type that in as well to give us a cue. So just a little bit before we start about Sage Day. Sage Day is a private accredited therapeutic school. We're located in northern New Jersey, and we work with students in grades 4 through 12. Many of our students grapple with depression, school phobia, school avoidance, or anxiety. Many people describe them as being emotionally fragile. Each Sage school is a supportive community where students find renewed confidence and success. One of the things we've done over the last few years is we've begun Sage in-district services. This is a service we provide that fills the gap between traditional in-school support and an out-of-district placement. And so what we do is we actually place in your public school, and they'll work with your child's study team, your teachers, your administration to provide a seamless counseling experience for the students. With the support of our in-district services, we find that students can gain the strategies and insight they need in order to make progress in school and better manage their emotional lives. Here you can see kind of the whole continuum of care that Sage Day provides. We have 3 campuses. We have our lower middle school located in Mahwah, and that serves grades 4 through 8. And then we have a high school in Rochelle Park and a high school in Boonton. And there down on the bottom, you can see the 8 in-district programs we currently have. So this is an idea that we came up with a few years ago to really have this continuum of care to provide an environment that's truly least restrictive for every student we serve, that each student gets just as much therapy as they need, or just as much support as they need. Some students can be served in district, some students fare much better in an out-of-district placement. So we're about ready to begin. I just want to go over the goals of today's event. We'd like to provide professionals with an overview of school refusal behavior, go over some common profiles and some intervention strategies. So to do this, we're going to talk about the form, which is how school refusal manifests, what it looks like, and the function, why do students engage in school refusal behavior. The form and function can be different for different students, and by understanding how it's manifesting and why the student is doing it, that can help you target the best way to intervene. We'll also look at various family structures that are found in school refusing students. We'll discuss some targeted and effective approaches to intervention. And finally, we'll end with some case studies in which all of these components have been utilized to affect change. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my partner, John Riley. John will explain the importance of understanding school refusal before turning to an examination of the range of severity.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar. We decided that we needed to present on school refusal because school refusal is among the most challenging, complex, and frustrating issues for school personnel. The difficulty of these cases can cause feelings of resignation by all involved. If not properly addressed, school refusal become intractable and have long-term negative effects on a student's life. Students with school refusal behavior have a higher incidence of dropout, delinquency, poverty, social isolation, marital problems, and difficulty working later in life. So it's clear that successful intervention can have a huge impact on a person's adult life. But impacting on school refusal behavior isn't easy, but there are some general points that will give you a good understanding of where to start and how to intervene. That is what we are going to share with you today. To start, there is a range of school refusal behaviors, school refusal types from mild to severe. Mild cases have easily identifiable cause and solution, but without proper intervention can move along a continuum to a more severe presentation. An example would be of such a case would be a student who is having a problem with a specific teacher, which causes the student to avoid that class or the whole school day. An intervention to help the teacher understand the student's discomfort or a change of class can mitigate that situation. This is an example of early intervention in response to a readily identifiable problem, with the school intervening before the situation got too bad. So it is very important to understand why a student is refusing. We'll get to that more in a few minutes. On the other end of the spectrum are those students whose school refusal has been entrenched, meaning a duration of 3 or more months. We've seen cases go from 3 months to 5 years. In the case I'm going to present later on, the student hadn't attended a full year of school all the way back to kindergarten through 8th grade. These are also cases where interventions have failed and the family has given up hope, or worse, are blatantly uncooperative. School refusal has been lost and there is a threat of dropout. We have all experienced these cases where there is a lot of acrimony, and these are the most difficult. These are cases where you may need to get DCPP involved, that's the old DIFUS, or family courts involved to get some movement in this case. Not only do you have a school refusal student, but you're also having a refusing family. Then there are the cases that are in the middle where there are some clear emotional issues exacerbated by some environmental stressors that contribute to the problems. These cases of medium severity are the most common. Now, Chris will explain what makes these cases challenging and point out some key elements of support for professionals while working with school refusal.
Thanks, John. So what makes these cases challenging, they're three basic areas. There's the level of urgency, the level of stress, and the level of time that it takes to work with them. In terms of the urgency, they're urgent because everyone involved wants a rapid solution. But unfortunately, the more entrenched the case is, the harder it is to affect change. And the entrenched cases, there are often you're dealing with a family where there's a tremendous resistance to change. So you'll see the student or family take a step forward and then take 2 steps back. This can be a lot of charged feeling in these cases, some conflict. The professionals may see the case one way, the parents may see the case another. So it's very easy for the professionals to get into vilifying the parent, or the parents vilifying. All of this is stuff that if you don't understand and address it, it's going to, deepen the problem further. Next, stress. Frequently, the student and family are under a lot of stress, as are the administrators, the teachers, and the child study team professionals. And the longer that the situation has gone on, the more pressure there is to change, the more stress there is. Another thing to consider is that sometimes the student and family may not show a great deal of stress, and that depends on how syntonic or acceptable the school refusal is to the student and or his or her parents. It's not uncommon that the school refusal is syntonic, since the student is often avoiding an unpleasant situation or maybe enjoying some positive reinforcements from staying home. Now, when it's not okay with the school and then okay with the family, that can kind of create even more frustration. But it's important to note that the presence or absence of stress in the student and family is diagnostic as to why the school refusal might be happening. So that would be the function of the school refusal. And then that last piece that makes it very difficult is just the time it takes to work with these cases because of the resistance. Sometimes you come up with what you think is a great plan, and the parent won't want to follow your plan because he or she is afraid of the child's reaction. And sometimes parents who may feel like confronting their student won't confront their child, they'll confront you instead. And sometimes if the student becomes upset by an intervention that you're going to make, maybe you're going to limit set or take away a privilege if the student doesn't go to school, and then the parents will experience some doubt about your plan and may actually sabotage it. Here's an example. In one of our recent in-district cases, we were going to initiate home instruction while the student's medication was adjusted. And the mom even requested this. However, when the plan was announced, mom put up a roadblock, meaning that the instruction was going to take place in the family home. The team became very frustrated by her reaction, but it really wasn't that unexpected. Our therapist was able to help the mom see that her reaction was based on her fear that her son would act out. We were able to get her to support the home instruction and put the firm expectation of going to school on her son or starting the home instruction. What can help you in these cases, what helps the professional, number one, teamwork. This is not an area where you should go it alone. It's always important to take a team approach and make sure you have plenty of support. Second, maintain a consistent demeanor and be calm, confident, firm, and empathic. It's calm, confident, firm, and empathic. You can lay the ground by anticipating the responses of the student or parent and role playing them, role playing the situation with a colleague beforehand. And finally, you're going to get frustrated, or people on your team are going to get frustrated. It's important to be patient. Don't rush. Don't try to make a quick intervention. That may only create more urgency. Instead, it's important to build a relationship and expect setbacks. Part of the frustration with certain cases lies in an unrealistic expectation about how quickly progress should be made. At the same time, you've got to set limits and expectations. You've got to reinforce that school attendance is a legal obligation. And you got to remember that any efforts that you make to protect the student or family from the realities of legal and natural consequences over a long period of time can be more destructive, actually, than acting with impatience. So knowing when to push and when to back off is often the art of intervention in school refusal and other behaviors. So right now, John is going to clarify the definition of school refusal before turning into a very important part of our presentation, which is an explanation of understanding form and function.
Okay, we're going to use the more contemporary definition to understand school refusal behavior. A more general and up-to-date definition is refusal to go to school or difficulty attending classes or remaining in school for an entire day. I'd like to expand this to include students who go to school but refuse to work while in school. School refusal is not just about attendance, but that's often what we think about. It's also about performance in school. Here's an example. Most recently, I was supervising a case of a student who had chronic school refusal behavior, where over the years he missed whole days of school for long periods of time. Since coming to SAGE and working with the parents, he had made great improvements in his attendance, but his refusal now focused around doing work and staying in class. While everyone was happy with his attendance, and that was no small feat, the work was not yet done, since now it was playing out in specific classes around work. So we began to focus more on what he was acting out by that behavior, which involved feelings about authority, with its roots being a seriously dysfunctional marital relationship. This underscores a point that what brings a student to our attention are the symptoms. Until the underlying issues are significantly addressed, be on the lookout for a shift in the form of the symptom. In these more complex cases, when we intervene to fix one symptom, it can often change to another symptom, as it did in this example. While this can appear like failure, it could really just be the first sign of progress, as interventions have disrupted what was normal, but can also mean that there's still a lot of work ahead. Successful interventions are multi-determined, but first must start with a good assessment and understanding of the problem. So this is really the takeaway from this webinar. This is understanding the form and function of school refusal behavior. So what is the form? As Chris alluded to earlier, form is how the school refusal manifests. Is it total refusal? The kid won't come to school at all. Does a student leave early? Does a student come in late every day? There's a lot of somaticizing, stomach aches, headaches. That's pretty common with a lot of school refusal students. Is it an early stage of school refusal? Is it very entrenched? Like I said before, the 3-month and beyond to several years are the entrenched cases. Is it a specific class, specific activity, specific day of the week? So that's all what you want to kind of look at first. What does it look like, the school refusal behavior? Then on to the function. That is the why of the behavior. Quite often people working with school refusal behavior, when describing the case, will go on about their feelings about the students and what has been tried. Again, you'll hear a lot about the frustration, you'll hear about the difficulties with the families, difficulties with the student. When asked what their understanding of why the student stays home, they are not always clear. Now, it isn't always obvious why a student is staying home. But you have to look at that. You have to look for that. You have to know what to look for. So that's important to answer that question so you can at least have a good insight into how to guide your interventions. At the most basic level, one can assess to see if the function is about negative reinforcements. That is, the student doesn't come to school because they're avoiding something unpleasant about school. On the other side of that is the positive reinforcements. They stay home for tangible rewards and to engage in pleasurable activities. It's also important to rule out drug use as a reason for school refusal. This would fall under the positive reinforcement, but if there is chronic marijuana use that goes undetected, and instead is being looked at, and the school refusal behavior is being understood as depression or anxiety, there's going to be little improvement. You do have to address any substance abuse issues that are getting in the way, or at least rule that out. We don't often see school refusal behavior, drug use involved in the school refusal behavior, but we have seen it over the years, and you should rule that out first. Now Chris will expand on two main school refusal profiles. That's going to be expanding on this, the function of school refusal. He will outline the most common psychiatric disorders among school refusing students, and then he'll explain how variations in family dynamics that contribute to the school refusal behavior.
Thanks, John. As you can see here, there are two main drivers of school refusal: negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Students with the negative reinforcement profile tend to be avoiding a situation at school that may fall under one or both of two categories. One, they might have difficulty facing an academic expectation, such as a large workload, a test, or a series of tests, or a big project. Second, they may have difficulty facing an adverse social situation. This might consist of a real or perceived interpersonal conflict, a fear of being bullied, or maybe a sense of social isolation. Sometimes just being in the school building will make the student anxious. One freshman in one of our in-district programs avoided school because he found the entrance to the building intimidating. Turned out a lot of upperclassmen. This student was terrified that the upperclassmen would do something to him. The beginning of the solution in this case was to allow this student to use a side entrance. It sounds simple enough, but that was just the beginning. This got him to the door, and we were able to provide the support the student needed to begin to understand why he perceived these typical students to be so threatening. As it turned out, he had experienced a conflict-ridden home life. In a few minutes, we'll look at how family conflict can lead a student to be fearful of people in the outside world. So just to sum up, students in the negative reinforcement profile tend to have a higher level of fear and or anxiety than the positive profile groups. So let's take a look at the positive reinforcement profile. This is an area where the student will stay home to receive parental attention, separation and individuation, or maybe the student is receiving some positive tangible reinforcement, time on the computer, time with the TV, or some other gratifying activity. It's important to note that this group tends to be associated with oppositional behavior. So students with the positive reinforcement profile will stay home for one or more of several reasons. One of the primary ones is play. One of our more precocious students stayed home because his older girlfriend didn't go to school either, and they hung out all day. This took a little while to figure out because the parent kept insisting that the student was too anxious to come to school. But when we thought about it, the anxiety defense didn't add up because the student wasn't showing any signs of significant anxiety. And really, when we thought about it, we said, well, why would he?
Chris, let me just jump in there. We'll often see with the positive reinforcement profiles that parents will make excuses for the student's behavior, the staying home behavior. And that was a clear case with this mother. She was trying to indicate that it was anxiety, and really she knew what was going on, but she was covering up for it.
Thanks, John. Good point. So generally, the reasons fall under the category of school's out. Reminds me of that old Alice Cooper song. It's all about, what do I get to do when I stay home? So it might be going to hang out at a friend's house or the home of a favorite relative, might be engaging in some illegal activity, might be getting to spend time with a parent who reinforces the behavior, and as John just pointed out, makes excuses for it. It's important to remember that in distinguishing between any kinds of profile types, many individuals will display a mixed presentation. So some students will display aspects of both the negative reinforcement profile, wherein they're avoiding some unpleasant circumstances, and the positive reinforcement profile, where they're receiving some secondary gain for avoiding school. And finally, I need to point out that there are some students who display no clear profile. The function of the school refusal cannot readily be identified, and it doesn't show a whole lot of consistency. This student includes students who are, this group rather, sorry, includes students who are depressed, and the school refusal may reflect the loss of interest in and ability to initiate everyday activities that's a common characteristic of depression. So let's take a look at some of the primary psychiatric disorders that are associated with school refusal. One study identified primary psychiatric disorders among youths with school refusal behavior, and the top three were separation anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. So in these three categories right there, you can see the roots of either the positive reinforcement or the negative reinforcement profile. The more anxiety-based would be the negative reinforcement, the more oppositional would be the positive reinforcement. And then you can see the other disorders associated below, not so significant. The percentages are fairly low. One thing we should note is that 32.9% of subjects in the study had no identified psychiatric disorder. So even though there's no typical school refusal type, many professionals make the fundamental error of attributing a single diagnosis or function to the behavior. And it's important to remember that it can be multi-determined, and it is very likely not tied to any particular diagnosis. Let's take a look now at the family dynamics that are associated with school refusal. Knowing the family dynamics of a school refusing child is very helpful because it helps you identify both strengths and vulnerabilities. And this helps us decipher how family members can help or how they may actually be contributing to the problem. With a positive reinforcement profile, family members are generally contributing quite a bit to the behavior. So let's look at the dynamic types. First one at the top there is the conflictual family. The conflictual family is characterized by a coercive parenting style. The children may display noncompliance and aggression because everything at home is a direct order, and it's really harsh consequences. So they get out in the world where things don't work that way, and they kind of think, well, why should I go along? So these students are likely to have issues with authority. These families may have high levels of hostility and conflict, even physical aggression. And it's hard for the students to go to school because the student doesn't really have a stable home base from which to separate. At times, the family may internalize their hostility and kind of displace it onto the school or community. And this is where the school looks unsafe to the student or punitive. This dynamic is not uncommon in students whose parents are divorcing, or maybe even in an intact family with a highly unstable marriage, or even after a highly contentious divorce has been finalized. It can go on years after a highly contentious divorce. The next type of family is the enmeshed family. In an enmeshed family, overly close parent-child dyads exist, and they're characterized by dependency and overindulgence. So this feeds right into that positive reinforcement profile. This occurs most frequently in students with separation issues who receive positive reinforcement for staying home. Here's a really important point. Typically, we think that only the child has difficulty separating, but a separation issue is kind of like Velcro. It has two sides. The parent often has his or her own conflict about the child separating and has a difficult time setting limits or dealing with the child's reaction to demands or limits being set. So there you can see the importance of family intervention when you're dealing with, a case like this. Next, the isolated family. There isn't a lot of information on this type of family because they don't tend to seek out treatment or help from the school. They don't have a lot of connection with the community. It's not uncommon for an isolated family to have some sort of abuse going on that's a secret. In an isolated family, the family may be okay with the school refusal unless the child begins to act out in a way that alarms the family. Here's another type of family where people in environments outside the school, outside the family, may be seen as unsafe, and the student does not feel part of the school or accepted by his or her peers. This takes us back to the student who was afraid to walk past the upperclassmen. This is one of the tougher dynamics to work with because these students and families are very guarded and they're slow to trust you, if at all. The detached family. In a detached family, everybody's kind of detached and isolated from each other within the family. So there's limited interaction among the family members. This can take the form of a withdrawn parent who needs. In a case like this, the parent may want the child to just grow up already, be independent. And a child can respond to this by feeling fear or abandonment, and that makes leaving home difficult. Here again, because the child never really feels quite connected, it makes it hard to separate. You have to connect before you can separate. And finally, there are the healthy families. In a healthy family, you may have a child who has individualized psychopathology. But when you look at the family as a whole, there are normal levels of cohesion and separation. There's not a lot of conflict. The family is able to engage in problem solving. And they're not like the other families that I've outlined before. But as I mentioned earlier, as with any profile, a family is very likely going to present with a mixed profile. So it's not just going to be one of these, it's going to be a combination. So once we understand the form, function, and the family profile, how do we help? John is going to outline some best practices in intervention.
Thanks, Chris. It can't be overstated that, as with many problems, intervening early is helpful. The longer any problem goes on, the more involved it gets. But to identify it early, you have to know what to look for. So before I go on to talk about some interventions with the family profile, so I just want to address a few of these points. At Sage Day, because a lot of the students have been identified as having school refusal or other emotional behavioral problems, they're pretty much on our radar at all times. They have a therapist. It's a small school, so we know if a student's been out for a period of time where we notice a pattern or a trend. In some public schools where it's very large or where there's rotating schedules, where there may not be a homeroom, it's very easy for some kids to slip through the cracks. And you can have a week go by maybe before anyone really gets alarmed by it. So now schools have student information systems, and it's very good to use that to try to identify trends and pick up some patterns of school refusal or absences. When you do notice that, what you can do is have the if it's a classified student, the case manager can be the lead person on intervening with the student that's showing some absence trends. With general ed students, it could be the guidance counselor or the school or the student assistant, the SAC, student assistance counselor. Some districts have attendance committees that are already monitoring this stuff. So again, early intervention would be a great way to get this before it gets more entrenched and involved. The other great way to identify early on is through the nurse's office. Lots of our kids have spent a lot of time in the nurse's office over the years, and that's a great spot to early intervene. So getting the nurse clued in on this, guidance getting clued in on this. Many of our students can have had incidents with stomach aches, chronic headaches. They're always in a nurse's office and looking to go home. So that's some of these students in the nurse's office are school refusals in the making. All right, so let's go on to interventions considering family dynamics. So the conflictual family, I'm not going to go over every, for time purposes here, we're not going to go over every type of family profile, but just going to pick out some of the more common ones that we may deal with and focusing really on the enmeshed type of family. But the conflictual family initially make the school the focus and focus on areas of agreement and what the rewards will be for attending school. Help the student and family contract to certain behaviors involving school. An unsafe house, as Chris said, is difficult to separate from, so look to lower the conflict by underscoring areas of agreement. Why do you do that? Because these families are quick to ignite into a fight. These are the kind of people that come in and they're ready to fight right from the get-go. So you really want to focus on areas of agreement and just focus on the school refusal behavior. Once you get that, if there's a counselor working with this family, Once you get the areas of agreement and start getting some movement forward, some progress, then you can focus on some of the more, the deeper issues that underlie the school refusal behavior. Remembering that school refusal is often a symptom of some other problem. With the more enmeshed type of families, there has to be a focus on the parents as primary. Usually you'd have an over-involved mom or a passive father. There needs to be a lot of efforts to engage the father, if there is one available, to help intervene on this problem. The parents need to present a united front, need to ask the father to stay around in the morning, and they need to co-implement both positive and negative consequences and expectations on the student. The over-involved mom can be encouraged to decrease excusing the child's behavior and provide attention only when there's appropriate behavior. The goal here is to reshape the over and under-involved parent-child relationship into a more clearly identified boundaries. Rewards are given for change in behavior. This is usually a very subtle but powerful shift that can be introduced at the beginning to help the parents regain some authority. If you want to go out with your friends this weekend, you need to go to school all week rather than the other way around. I will go to school all next week if you let me go out this weekend. The parents need to shift that around. That often kind of realigns the power in the family if the parents can reward after the behavior has been shown. Where refusal is for positive tangible reward, it is recommended that the focus be on the entire family, get the family members to participate and communicate through contracting, have clear consequences for compliance and non-compliance. A student will test with tantrums that shake the resolve of the parents. It is important that the parents anticipate that and present as united. In that case Chris talked about before, where the parent had a negative reaction to school, to home instruction being at the home. We kind of knew that was going to happen by knowing this mom's reaction, so we were able to help the parent understand what their anxiety was about and stay firm. After a few rounds of a parent going through this and standing firm to a child's tantrums or regression, they usually feel a lot more positive about us, enforcing that authority. For the isolated type of families, the child should be encouraged to branch out and help family members support that. School refusal is not due so much to separation issues in the parent, but fear of the unknown in the child. Again, role playing could be very helpful for the child when it comes to this. Relationships with someone in the school, a teacher, a counselor, is very important. That connection is a relationship in the school that is sought out when the child is feeling stressed or needs some emotional holding. This person helps the school feel smaller and more welcoming. It can be just the place where a student finds some respite during those times of anxiety. Instead of going home, they go to that person, they go to that place in the building, again, making the school feel smaller, especially those isolated kids don't feel very connection inside the school is very, very important. So I'm going to pass over to Chris now, who will discuss how you can stay positive throughout the process and outline the keys to helping a student during the actual re-entry to the school.
Thanks, John. It's not easy to stay positive in these cases, but it is important. So you can do this by remembering to expect, educate, and support. As we've emphasized throughout the presentation, expect there to be setbacks and push back, but stay positive. Educate your parents and colleagues so that they will expect setbacks and pushback. This will enable the parents and your teachers and anybody else who's working with the case to cope more effectively. And then support. You need to support parents in their efforts since they're going to have doubts that they're doing the right thing. Remember that many parents and students don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and their inappropriate behavior is really just a defense. As with any defense, we have to tread lightly and not take it away before we've helped the student or family develop some faith that a new approach will be better than the one that they know and trust. So we often have to take a few steps back when things start to go awry. It's just part of the process. So how might this play out? A father might say to his daughter, if you don't go to school, you're not going to have your phone anymore on any day you stay home. The daughter is going to put up a big protest or react negatively because now for the first time, dad has enforced a limitation and an expectation. Or maybe on the morning of a return date, a student barricades himself in his bedroom and starts having panic attacks. If we've taken the time to identify form and function, neither of these scenarios will surprise us. And both scenarios will be easier to remedy when you educate the parents so they'll expect this kind of reaction. Then support the parent in holding the line when the tension starts. So now let's take a look at how we get the school refusing student back to school. Home visits. When the student won't come to you, go to the student. Sessions outside the home, preferably at school or at an alternate site, come next. Always try to move the student away from home toward the school while you're establishing a relationship. But again, move slowly, don't go too fast. Meet the student where they are. By doing this, the counselor can begin to provide a holding, soothing function, and that is something the student will be able to use when they attempt to tolerate a school day. Particularly for students prone to panic episodes, move very slowly, provide them with strategies such as relaxation techniques. Second, build your team. Your team should include students' teachers, the principal, any other administrator, so that everybody's on board with working the plan. When the student begins to return to school, will he need someone to meet him at the door? What classes will she attend? Will she have a modified schedule? How will the schedule change over time? What are the options for the student if he or she begins to feel distress? All of these are things to consider in working with your team and creating a plan. Finally, what you need to do is reassure the student and family and predict success. The student needs to know a couple of things. First, they need to know that not everything's going to be perfect. And second, they need to know that your team is going to make every effort to make things manageable during the transition. Recently, one of our students was having trouble reestablishing her routine due to all the snow days. She really wants to be in school, but she just gets overwhelmed. So she agreed with coaxing from a counselor to try a class that she hadn't been able to attend easily. And don't you know, on this day, the class activity required public speaking. They were doing a debate. Not at all the best class for an acutely anxious person. The teacher, counselor, and student met together, and they were able to process that experience, and eventually they had a good laugh when they all acknowledged the irony of the situation. And on top of that, it wound up being really good since the girl realized that she had survived the experience, and she was able to experience her teacher as being more empathic than she previously thought possible. So there's an example that even when things don't go perfectly, you can look for the opportunity to help a student process the experience in a more positive way. So right now, I'm going to hand the presentation back to John, who will describe a couple of cases that demonstrate the principles of first, accurate diagnosis through understanding form, function, and family dynamics, and then using that diagnosis to engage in some effective intervention.
Yeah, here's where we're going to try to bring all this information together and work with real people, real cases that we've had over the years. So the first case is Matt. Matt was a bright, good-looking student who was first evaluated to admission into our school at the end of his 8th grade year in preparation for his freshman year. He had not attended school for a full year ever. He missed 130 days in 8th grade alone. Because of his intelligence and lack of attendance requirements in elementary school and middle school, he was progressed through middle school uninterrupted. Therefore, the issue was never really addressed. But as high school approached, the parents began to get more urgent, as did the child study team. Matt was also beginning to see that his future did not look bright unless he really, changed this dynamic. He was a smart kid and motivated kid. Matt's case was entrenched, and he had some serious anxiety, separation anxiety, and an enmeshed relationship with his mother. The function in this case was a positive reinforcement profile, as both Matt and his mom enjoyed each other's company at home. Notable in this case was his mom's anxiety and her inability to make any demands on Matt or to instill a sense of soothing for her son as she presented with significant anxiety. She saw herself as Matt's protector. She'd often make excuses for his behavior and externalize the reasons for his school refusal. This family was intact, but father's influence was marginalized by the mom. When I met the father, I saw a strong person who I felt would be an asset in helping affect change. The dynamics of this family really had to change, despite the long duration of the problem. We felt that there was a positive prognosis since Matt voiced a desire to change. He made an easy connection in the initial interview and was very likable, with limited signs of anxiety. He became noticeably more anxious when his mother was part of the interview process. The treatment modality was twice weekly individual counseling, weekly family counseling, and twice weekly group counseling. Leading up to his freshman year, we did do individual and family counseling during the summer months to get him ready for the new school year. We helped the father become reconnected with both his wife and son, and he agreed to start his workday later to help with the morning routine. The parents began to work on their marital issues, and the father moved back into being the mom's primary relationship in the family, allowing the intensity between Matt and his mom to diminish. Initially, the mother was frustrating as she presented a lot of doubt that therapy would work and had a hopeless and anxious presentation. It became obvious that Matt was serving as the identified patient whose pathology was masking significant marital issues and emotional problems of the mom. The mother refused any suggestion that she would get into treatment for herself, so the therapist had to do her best to address some of the mom's issues in family counseling. Matt's school refusal served to provide the mother with company during the day. During Matt's time at home, he was rewarded with free reign of the computer and TV and special daily events when he stayed home with his mom. They'd go on trips into the city, they'd go to the mall. This was all done very unconsciously, but once brought to light, the father stepped in and started to set some expectations on both his son and his wife. The comfort of home was disrupted and the niceties were provided when school was attended. The start was rocky, but perseverance and patience was the key. Within 3 months, Matt was attending school full time, and attendance was never again a significant issue, other than after long vacation breaks when family discord emerged from time to time. What was really important in this case was Dad becoming reconnected in the family. Dad had a temper, was seen as having a temper issue early on in the elementary, middle school years, and he would sometimes get physical with Matt, not in an abusive way, but that caused the mom to push him out of the way and make the dad feel incompetent. So he felt he was a danger to this whole situation. In fact, he was really trying to help and pulling him in and helping him, understand how important he would be and having some support about how to assert his authority was tremendously helpful to this case. Should be noted that Matt graduated from high school and went to four-year college and often graduate school now. So that was one of those cases that a lot of intensive intervention had a really, really great outcome. Next case I want to discuss is from one of our in-district programs. This is a case of Samantha. She was referred to the SAGE program in September of 2013. She was referred to assist with her transition back to school after being placed on home instruction since the spring of 2013. She was placed on home instruction due to school refusal behavior with underlying anxiety and depression, which led to a hospitalization. The function of her school refusal was to avoid the fear of humiliation by her peers. Once referral was made to the SAGE program therapist, the district's case manager and family met to discuss the needs, help the team understand the emotional issues, and to develop a transition plan. The sessions were scheduled for Sam to come in during the day for her sessions, and academic work would be done at home. During sessions, we came up with a story that she could tell other students about where she had been, but she felt that she could tell the true story to a few of her closer friends, but would ask them to respect her privacy. Helping her realize that her own shame and negative feelings about her problems were being projected onto other students, and that she needed to have more empathy for herself and stop being so judgmental, helped her realize that other students probably wouldn't be as critical of her as she was being of herself, which was in fact the case. Armed with her story, she was surprised how accepting and empathic the other students were when they did know the truth. That insight helped her to schedule a full return to school, which was aided by her being placed in a self-contained classroom to assist with transition back into school. It should be noted that not all went smooth, as one student did make a derogatory statement about her hospitalization. However, she was able to use the support systems at school, and the school administration confronted the offending student about the comment, for which an apology was made. With the help of the therapist, who helped coordinate communication between the student and teachers, communication with the prescribing psychiatrist, there was a continuum of care which lowered stress for the student, preventing the student's placement on another round of home instruction. Again, this was not one of those cases where everything just went in a straight line up of progress. There was a lot of ups and downs. Again, as Chris alluded to before, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but having a really strong supportive team was very helpful. In this specific school, we do support a kind of a self-contained classroom for these kind of fragile students. It sometimes feels like a mini SAGE at this at this program, and there's a real great coordination between the teachers, the teacher, and the mainstream teachers, because our students can be in that classroom when they need to, but then they go out from there to mainstream classes when they're ready to do that. So those are just a few examples of how to intervene, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for students who are currently on your caseload now. To summarize, all interventions need to be guided by an understanding of the form and function of school refusal behavior and the family dynamics. If a case is a level that can be managed in district, a lead person needs to be identified and a team approach needs to be put into place to help with managing the transition and reintegration back into school. Now for the final portion of our presentation, I'm going to turn things over to Chris again to moderate the question and answer.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. Just a few housekeeping things. First, if you have a question you haven't asked, please type it in now. Second, you may be wondering how you get your certificate of completion. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive an email from GoToWebinar with a survey link. That link will take you to a very brief survey. I think it's 5 questions. And once you complete the survey, you'll be directed to print your certificate with your CEU credit. Second, or finally, the PowerPoint. Someone asked, how do we save the PowerPoint? We're going to be making the slides and the recording available on SageDay's homepage tomorrow morning. So that's www.sageday.com. So let's get to some questions. First question comes from a parent. My son is generally anxious and has trouble sleeping at night due to insomnia. This affects his mood in the morning and intensifies his anxiety, making it impossible to get him out of bed. I've taken away things he enjoys, cell phone, music, things like that, but this doesn't help. What can I do to motivate him to go to school? John?
Yeah, I'll take that one. That's a case of a mom who's willing to do the behavioral stuff, which is usually what people hesitate to do. She's seeing very little response to that approach. That leads me to believe there probably is a deeper emotional issue going on that needs to be addressed. If a student is truly depressed, they fall under that, as we talked about in the presentation, there's not a clear positive or negative motivation for them staying home. They're just depressed. Seriously depressed people, you cannot motivate or cajole or threaten to go to school. So I would suggest, if it's not happening already, a real thorough diagnosis, psychiatric diagnosis for this student, and putting getting into therapy and really trying to understand the severity of the depression, and then again understand the form and the function of it, and guide the interventions based on understanding all the points that we brought up today.
Thanks, John. So there's an example of really understanding, both the behavioral intervention and possibly the therapeutic intervention, and really primarily understanding what's the function, why is this going on, before you can really figure out what to do. Here's another question. How do you distinguish school refusal behavior from untreated anxiety or depression?
Well, one can be, as we saw before, one can have school refusal and have no anxiety and no depression. So I think that goes back to the question before. I think really understanding the form and the function, understanding if there is real anxiety, like that other case we talked about. The mom was saying that this student is anxious, and the student was saying there's anxious. Meanwhile, he was home basically playing, and there's a lot of rewards for a lot of pleasant activities going on to keep him from going to school. So again, thorough diagnosis is going to be important. A good clinician will be able to pick up on whether there's really debilitating anxiety or depression, and take it from there.
Here's kind of a related question. What about a child with attachment issues? Often the consequences reward system has no effect.
That's a tough one. Can you read that question again, just so I?
It was asking about a child with attachment issues. So I guess what I'm thinking, just thinking out loud a little bit, I'm thinking, and please jump in, John, but I'm thinking that there you've got to treat the attachment disorder, just as with, in that situation we had just a few minutes ago with the child where all the behavioral interventions were being tried. Here's a case where the question is saying, yeah, the behavioral stuff isn't working, that's got an attachment disorder, you've got to treat the attachment disorder. So you've got to, this might be the case where there has not been a connection, and now you're trying to help this person form a connection. Obviously, attachment disorders are complex and difficult to treat, and it takes time. Um, but that's the underlying cause or maybe the underlying cause of the school refusal behavior. I think the other thing that you need to keep in mind is, what we said earlier about diagnosis, and that school refusal behavior is usually not tied to a single diagnosis. And so it gets real easy in one of these cases to seize onto, well, there's an attachment disorder, so this has to be the whole enchilada, but there may be more to it than that. So I think it might be, kind of dig into that function a little bit and see what else might be at stake. John, what do you have there?
Yeah, nothing's some of these presenting problems are very, very complex. So when people say that we've tried everything and nothing seemed to work, I always like to find out how many times they've tried the things that aren't working. Usually people expect quick responses, quick results to any intervention. Really getting everyone's buy-in to the interventions, and that knowing that there's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back is usually what I see in these cases, that people give up very easily. The longer this goes on, the harder it is to have change. With the real entrenched cases, with the real separation individuation mesh cases, separation individuation cases, the attachment cases, things don't change very easily. What can look like an enmeshed case sometimes, where the student is, wants to be home and be with the mom. I was just supervising a case the other day, where it looked like there was a real enmeshment there between the mom and the student. Really, what it was this mom really wanted the student to be far more independent than they were really ready for. So the student really wanted to attach to the mom, and did not feel ready to go out there into the world. And the mom was very eager for them to go out there in the world. So we really had to work with the mom in understanding what was going on. And once she understood that, it started to see some improvement. Have another question?
Yes, we do. How effective is it to involve the local police as a step to assist a parent in getting a student who refuses to get out of bed to come to school after school refusal has cycled between improvement and regression?
Usually if the parent is really buying into wanting the student in school and it's really part of the team, you don't have to go use the courts or the police. Those tend to be the cases where you have a school refusing student as well as a really school refusing parent, a real adversarial situation. We don't come across this all that often, but when you do, you have to make that school refusal behavior more dystonic. We have to remember also, one thing that we have to just underscore here is it's ultimately the parent's job to get the student to school. Um, Often they'll make it our responsibility, and we're responsible to the extent that we have to try to understand what's going on and try to shape interventions, and really try to make the school the most inviting place possible. But the parents really have to be the authority in this case, and we can point out them what's getting in the way and try to help that have that happen. In the rare cases when they will not buy into what you're trying to do, then you have to make it a little more uncomfortable for them and employ the courts. You know, DIFUS can get involved, and then you see a change.
That's great, John. It seems that you actually addressed our next question just now. The question was, what about the student whose parents are not cooperative? It sounds like what you were saying is that that's the step where you have to involve law enforcement or the court.
Yeah, well, I'm glad because we're running out of time, and if we can handle 2 questions at one time, that'd be great. But again, I do want to underscore that that's rare, but don't hesitate. A lot of school districts are very hesitant to employ the police. They think that they're being harsh and cruel, and it really isn't. I mean, at times that can be the most empathic thing to have happen, because you have to remember, if these cases are really entrenched and there's no movement, the prognosis for a good, productive life down the road in adulthood is compromised. So we do have to do whatever we can to affect some change in these families, and sometimes using those kind of measures that seem untherapeutic actually help people engage in the therapeutic process.
Thanks, John. Here's another good question. I am a school counselor and have a particularly challenging student who has no problem with coming to school but does nothing while he is here. Have you worked with similar cases, and which interventions have worked?
Well, that's similar to a case I presented earlier, where the school refusal was taking the form of not performing in school. Really across the board, not doing any classwork. Those are tricky. I can't say here is what causes that. There's usually something's being acted out. There's some authority issue being acted out. There may be an undiagnosed learning disability sometimes, where the student's not working because they're afraid to show. Their disability, and they feel humiliated. I mean, it could be very, very complex. I think we just have to really be patient and try to understand, again, the function of the school refusal, of the work refusal behavior in this case.
I can take that on a little bit as well. Having served as a principal of a Sage Day school for many years, I had many students like this sent to my office, or went into the classroom to speak with them. Because many times a student will come to Sage Day and they'll come to school every day and they'll be happy to come, but they're not ready to do any work. And here, understanding the purpose of not doing the work or the disability that's getting in the way of doing the work is really important. You don't want to just assume that the person is being resistant and rebellious, because there really could be something that's getting in the way. But there have been many cases I've dealt with where there was a resistance or a rebellion going on. One of the most common scenarios I saw over the years was a student whose parents, one of the other parent was a teacher. And for that parent, education was so important. And so what better way to rebel than to refuse to do your schoolwork, especially when you're a capable student who can do the work. So there again, understanding the function of the behavior, because not doing work refusal, is on the continuum of school refusal. It's at the milder end, but it's right there. Let's see, do we have time for another question? Yes, we do. In a public school, what should the roles be of all involved? The principal, the child study team, guidance, teachers, nurse, attendance office. Who should take the lead?
There's no clear, one person to take the lead. There needs to be one person who takes the lead. What their job title isn't as important. It could be any of those people that you talked about at Sage Day, or in our in-district programs. It's usually the case manager, the therapist, is who gets involved with that. But again, there's a whole team of teachers, and the principal is often intimately involved, the clinical director. And it's in a public school. It could be the SAC, it could be the guidance counselor if it's a non-classified school refusal student. If it's a classified school refusal student, that's usually going to be the case manager that gets involved. I think that the job of that point person, though, is to make sure that the teachers understand that the student may or may not need to leave a class. If they're really struggling with anxiety and they need to uh, have an out of a class when they're feeling overwhelmed, the teachers need to buy into that. They need to not try to single the kid out. There needs to be maybe a secret sign or a word that lets the teacher know the student is leaving, and not just being oppositional and defiant. Um, by and large, teachers are very understanding and empathic to what's going on once they understand what the issues are. So educating that whole team, all the people involved with this student, is very important. I could only think of 2 cases over the years where a teacher took the stance of, well, tough, you know, I don't believe in emotional problems, and therefore this student is not going to get any special treatment from me. I mean, that becomes an issue between the administration and that teacher. But I wouldn't try to push the river on that. I would try to take the student out of that class, and and not try to fix that teacher, the child and teacher relationship. At that point, there's too much at stake to try to force anything.
Good point there. As John said, in most cases, teachers are more than willing to work with you if they understand what's going on. You have to remember the frustration of the situation mounts for everyone. And if you're not in the loop, your frustration can be very high, because you just see somebody kind of showing up and disappearing again with no real explanation. Um, it looks like we're about out of time. We do have some questions that we were not able to get to today. What we can do is that John and I can put together some answers to these questions and get these out to you in an email soon, probably by next week. Yeah, we'll send out an email that kind of addresses some of the questions that we were able to answer and mostly those that we weren't. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for spending time with us on this beautiful spring day, and enjoy the rest of your day.